Right now, while you're watching this, you might believe you're the only version of yourself, the only one walking this specific path, making these specific choices and living this one life. But science hints at a far more astonishing possibility. A version of you is doing something completely different at this very moment. One may have taken that other job, another may have never met that important person in your life, and yet another might not even be watching this video at all. This isn't science fiction. This is the very frontier of quantum physics, a realm where the boundaries of logic dissolve and reality itself becomes something far more fluid, more multidimensional, and more complex than anything we were ever taught. For centuries, we've been told that life is linear, a straight path, a sequence of cause and effect, a singular experience unfolding moment by moment. But quantum theory doesn't just challenge that idea, it shatters it. It suggests that the life you're living may not be the only one, that each moment, each choice, each quantum fluctuation could potentially give rise to a new version of reality altogether. And you might be existing in more than one of them, not metaphorically, but in a deeply literal, deeply scientific way. This video is not about fantasy. It's about where the most cutting-edge physics meets the most haunting philosophical questions. It's about how the building blocks of existence behave in ways that defy everything we thought we knew, and how those behaviors may echo all the way up the ladder of complexity, from subatomic particles to human consciousness. What you're about to experience is a journey through one of the most profound concepts ever explored, quantum superposition and the mind-altering implications it has on reality. You'll discover how particles can exist in multiple states at once, how the act of observation collapses infinite possibilities into one, and how this phenomenon might not be confined to the quantum world alone. We'll explore how this could relate to your life, your decisions, your identity, and the very nature of free will. Because maybe, just maybe, the version of reality you're in right now is only one frequency on an infinite spectrum. And once you begin to grasp that, you may never look at your choices or yourself the same way again. So stay with this moment, because everything that comes next could shift the way you understand existence itself. Think of a moment where two conflicting options stood before you. Maybe it was a yes or no, stay or go, speak or remain silent. In your world, you chose one. But in the quantum world, the fabric of reality plays by different rules. Rules that don't just allow contradiction, they require it. At the heart of this concept lies quantum superposition. It's not just a technical term buried in physics textbooks. It's a principle that challenges everything about how we perceive reality. It says that something can exist in multiple states at once until it is observed. Not metaphorically, not as a figure of speech, but quite literally. Let's begin with something that's not theoretical, something that has been tested, retested, and verified in laboratories across the world. It's known as the double-slit experiment, and it might be the most unsettling experiment in all of science. Imagine you fire tiny particles, electrons, for example, toward a barrier with two slits. Behind the barrier is a screen that records where each particle lands. Simple enough. If the electrons are particles, they should go through one slit or the other and create two lines on the screen, corresponding to the slits. But that's not what happens. Instead, an interference pattern appears. A complex arrangement of light and dark bands, as though the electrons were waves, not particles, interfering with each other. But it gets stranger. When you try to observe which slit the electron goes through, the interference pattern disappears. The electrons behave like particles again. The act of observation forces them to choose a state. This is not speculation. This is empirical evidence. Until observed, those electrons existed in a superposition, occupying both possibilities simultaneously. But your attention collapses the wave into a specific outcome. It's like flipping a coin and seeing not heads or tails, but both at the same time until you decide to look. And then it becomes one or the other. This is not just a curiosity of subatomic particles. It forms the foundation of quantum mechanics, a field that governs everything from the behavior of atoms to the technology in your smartphone. MRI machines, lasers, GPS systems, all owe their existence to quantum principles. But let's not stop at equipment. Let's bring this closer to your perception of reality. If particles can be in multiple places, multiple states, multiple trajectories all at once, then how stable is the reality built from those particles? How certain are we that your version of now is the only one? Let's take a detour into one of the most famous metaphors in physics: Schrödinger's cat. A cat is placed in a sealed box, along with a radioactive atom that may or may not decay, triggering a mechanism that kills the cat if it does. According to quantum theory, until you open the box, the atom is both decayed and not decayed, and the cat is both alive and dead. Not just unknown, actually both at once. It's meant to illustrate the absurdity of applying quantum mechanics to everyday objects. But what if it's not absurd? What if it's a hint at a deeper truth? That everything, even at macroscopic levels, is subject to superposition, and we're just beginning to notice it. Think about this. At the smallest level, your brain is composed of particles obeying quantum laws. Could consciousness itself be influenced by these principles? Could your thoughts, perceptions, even your sense of identity exist in a superposed state until something collapses them into coherence? Quantum computers already use this principle. They don't rely on bits that are either 0 or 1. They use qubits, quantum bits, that can be both 0 and 1 simultaneously. That's what gives them unimaginable processing power. But it also means we've learned to harness a state of reality that defies binary logic. This isn't just theoretical, it's transformative. It reshapes how we think about dualities, not just in science, but in life. Not either slash or but both slash, and not this or that, but a hidden space where contradictions coexist until acted upon. You are not a single fixed identity navigating a single fixed path. You are an expression of probabilities collapsing into momentary certainty. Every thought, every action, every flicker of awareness is a convergence of what could have been and what now is, a balance between infinite outcomes and focused intention. That's the core of quantum superposition, not just a theory, but a philosophical mirror held up to existence itself. And the deeper you go into it, the more you begin to question. If the building blocks of reality refuse to settle on a single state, maybe you weren't meant to either. Maybe possibility is your default condition, and certainty is just a temporary illusion. In the next part, we'll move beyond particles. We'll explore what happens when these principles are applied not just to atoms and electrons, but to you, your life, your choices, your existence across infinite timelines. Let's continue. Take a moment to consider something that might seem absurd at first glance. If subatomic particles, the very ingredients that make up the universe, can exist in multiple states at once, then what does that say about the physical structures they compose? What does that say about you? You are not made of something separate from quantum particles. Your body, your brain, your thoughts, all are built from quantum matter, arranged in complex configurations. So if particles behave strangely at the smallest level, then perhaps that strangeness doesn't stay confined to the microscopic world. Perhaps it extends upward into biology, into consciousness, into identity. This is where one of the most radical ideas in modern science enters the picture. It's called the many worlds interpretation. This isn't a fantasy plucked from a science fiction novel. It's a serious hypothesis proposed by physicist Hugh Everett III in 1957. A bold attempt to make sense of quantum mechanics without relying on the notion that particles collapse into one state when observed. Instead, Everett proposed something far more unsettling: that all possible outcomes of a quantum event actually occur, not just hypothetically but in separate branches of reality. In other words, when a quantum choice is presented, whether an electron spins up or down, whether a photon passes through one slit or the other, both outcomes happen. Not in a shared space, but in split realities. Realities that continue onward independently. Worlds where the outcomes are different, but just as real. Let's bring this closer to home. Think about a decision you made recently. Maybe it was trivial. Maybe it felt life-changing. Now, according to the many worlds interpretation, there's a version of reality where you made the opposite decision. A version where things unfolded along a different trajectory. And just as you are watching this video now, another version of you, composed of the same quantum building blocks, might be walking a completely different path. This isn't a metaphor. It's a literal extension of quantum superposition. scaled to the level of entire universes. Every quantum event, no matter how small, triggers a branching, not just in theory, but in actuality. And since quantum events happen constantly billions of times every second, these branches multiply at an unimaginable rate, each one forming its own distinct reality, its own version of the universe. Now picture this branching process in your life. There's a version of you who turned left instead of right on that one day. A version who accepted a different job. A version who stayed silent instead of speaking up. A version who pursued a passion instead of suppressing it. These aren't just hypotheticals. They are, in this model, actual realities just inaccessible to you in this one. And they're not parallel dimensions in some cosmic library. They're just as real as the one you're experiencing, with their own histories, outcomes, and consequences. They evolve forward with each passing moment, branching again and again, like the roots of a tree spreading infinitely beneath the surface of reality. Let's pause here and acknowledge how staggering this is. If this theory holds, then right now, there are endless versions of you, some just slightly different, others radically transformed, all coexisting in a vast quantum landscape. Each moment, each decision, each fluctuation expands that web even further. Now ask yourself, what defines the you that's watching this video? Is it the sum of your choices? Is it your memory, your experience, your body? Or is it simply the result of a sequence of probability collapses, a chain of quantum outcomes that led to this present configuration? Because if there are other versions of you, each shaped by a different chain of events, then identity itself becomes fluid. You're not one thing, you're a spectrum of possibilities. That's where this concept gains emotional weight. Not just scientific intrigue, but a profound personal implication. Somewhere, according to this interpretation, there's a version of you who fulfilled every dream, who made the boldest choices, who took every opportunity you hesitated to embrace. That version exists not in fantasy, but in quantum logic. But so does the opposite. There's a version who made the mistakes you avoided, who stumbled down paths you feared, who carries regrets you escaped in this timeline. Both versions are real. Both versions are equally you. This changes how we see success, failure, regret, and longing, because it reframes our entire concept of reality, not as a straight line, but as an infinite branching structure, a cosmic tree where every choice grows a new limb of existence. Now let's address a common misunderstanding. The many worlds interpretation is not suggesting that your personal choices create these realities in a mystical sense. It's not saying you are consciously manifesting alternate timelines. The branching is not about decision-making, it's about quantum outcomes. It's tempting to associate these ideas with human agency, but the branching occurs regardless of intention. Every time a quantum event happens, whether in a particle, an atom, or a nerve impulse, the universe splits. You're not the cause of the branching. You are a product of it. That's what makes it so profound. It removes human exceptionalism from the equation. You are not separate from quantum behavior. You are immersed in it. Your identity is an emergent property of it. Still, it's hard not to feel a pull, a strange resonance, when we think about those alternate versions of ourselves. The ones who loved differently, the ones who dared more, the ones who never had to face the things you did. Because although the theory says these branches are isolated, our minds resist that boundary. We yearn to peek through the veil, to know what could have been, to feel connected to the paths not taken. And maybe that yearning isn't just emotional. Maybe it's an echo, a subtle signal from the fabric of reality itself, whispering that our experience is not singular, but part of a far vaster spectrum. So now we're faced with a strange paradox. If infinite versions of you exist, are they all equally real? Is this version of you more important simply because it's the one you're aware of? Or is awareness itself a product of observation, a collapsing of superposed consciousness into one coherent narrative? Maybe this identity you call you is not a fixed self, but a result of quantum attention, your internal observer effect narrowing the field of possibility into one perceptual thread. This brings us full circle to a staggering thought. Perhaps identity is not a fixed structure, but a shifting selection. A collapsing of all potential versions into one experienced self. Not because the others aren't real, but because this is the one you're observing now. So who are you? Product of biology, of memory, of culture? Or are you something far stranger? A conscious point of focus amidst infinite versions, each equally true, each equally possible, each equally you. The many worlds interpretation doesn't just challenge our understanding of the universe. It challenges everything we thought we knew about ourselves. And the more we explore these ideas, the more we see that the real mystery isn't out there in distant galaxies or hidden dimensions. The real mystery is right here, in the core of your experience, in the mirror of your own awareness, in the invisible branching pathways beneath every heartbeat and thought. And this is only the beginning. Next, we'll move deeper into the battle of interpretations, where brilliant minds clash over which version of quantum reality is true, and why none of them can prove the others wrong. There's something deeply unsettling about science when it pushes against the boundaries of our understanding. And nowhere is that more evident than in the debate over quantum reality. If you've ever wondered how such a precise, mathematically rigorous field could contain so much philosophical chaos, quantum mechanics is your answer. Here's the twist that throws even the most brilliant minds into disarray. Different interpretations of quantum mechanics make the same mathematical predictions, yet describe wildly different pictures of reality. It's not that one is clearly right and the others are obviously wrong. It's that all of them seem to work, and none of them can be proven decisively over the others. This isn't just puzzling. It's the very heart of modern scientific mystery. At the center of it all is the strange phenomenon we discussed earlier, superposition, the idea that particles exist in multiple states until measured. But here's the catch. Quantum mechanics doesn't actually explain why measurement causes collapse, or whether collapse even happens at all. It only tells you how to calculate the probabilities of different outcomes. The rest is left to interpretation, and that's where the debate begins. Let's begin with the most widely taught interpretation, the Copenhagen interpretation. It's the traditional view that most physicists grew up with. In this view, reality exists in a fuzzy, probabilistic haze until a measurement forces it into a definite outcome. In other words, the particle is in all states at once until something or someone observes it. Then suddenly it chooses a state, and the wave function collapses. This interpretation doesn't try to explain what counts as a measurement or why observation has this mysterious power. It simply says, that's how nature works. Many scientists accept it because it's straightforward and operationally useful. It allows you to do the math, get the results, and move on. But beneath its practicality lies a massive unresolved tension. What exactly causes collapse, and why does consciousness seem to matter? That question has haunted physicists for decades. Some even argue that the Copenhagen interpretation smuggles mysticism into science, suggesting that an observer's awareness can shape physical reality. And yet, despite its philosophical awkwardness, it remains dominant in textbooks and classrooms around the world. But then there's the heretical voice, the one that refuses to accept that measurement is some special, magical process. This voice is Hugh Everett's many worlds interpretation, which you've already seen in action. Instead of collapse, Everett proposed a radical solution. Everything happens. Every outcome occurs in a separate branch of reality. Measurement doesn't choose an outcome. It merely reveals which version of reality you're now entangled with. In this view, the universe never collapses. It only expands, branching endlessly with every quantum interaction. Nothing is lost. Nothing is deleted. You don't collapse a wave function. You become part of a larger, more complex superposition. Many worlds removes the need for an observer to cause change. It restores objectivity to physics, at the cost of accepting an infinite number of universes. For some, that's a small price to pay. For others, it's too high a cost. After all, if we can never access these other worlds, how do we know they're real? That's where the debate gets fierce. There's another interpretation that attempts to rescue determinism without invoking multiple realities. It's called the pilot wave theory, also known as Bohmian mechanics, after physicist David Bohm. This model introduces a hidden layer beneath quantum behavior, an invisible wave that guides particles along deterministic paths. In this view, the universe isn't probabilistic at all, we just don't see the hidden variables that govern its behavior. Pilot wave theory brings back the comfort of cause and effect. There's no spooky observer effect, no branching universes, no fuzzy indeterminacy. Particles follow clear trajectories, and the apparent randomness of quantum outcomes is merely a reflection of our ignorance about the hidden factors at play. But again, here's the twist. This model, too, makes the same predictions as standard quantum mechanics. You can't use it to distinguish experimental results from other interpretations. It's a different story about the same mathematics. Then there's QBism, a newer, more radical perspective. QBism, short for quantum Bayesianism, says that quantum probabilities don't describe reality at all. Instead, they reflect an individual observer's subjective knowledge. In this view, the wave function isn't a property of the system. It's a tool the observer uses to organize expectations. So rather than claiming quantum physics tells us what the world is, QBism says it tells us what we can expect to see. It's a shift from ontology to epistemology, from being to knowing. Reality in this model becomes a personal narrative. The universe is not a fixed objective structure, but an evolving network of experiences shaped by your interaction with it. And here's where things get even stranger. All these interpretations, Copenhagen, many worlds, pilot wave, QBism, fit the same experimental data. They produce the same results, the same equations, the same outcomes in labs around the world. You can't prove one over the other through measurement. They're not different theories of physics. They're different philosophies of reality. That's why physicists are divided. Not because the math is unclear, but because the meaning of the math is contested. And that's a rare position for science to be in. On one side, you have pragmatists who say, "Who cares what's real? Just use the equations and get the answer." On the other side, you have those who believe science must explain not just what works, but why it works and what kind of universe we actually live in. The debate isn't abstract. It's driven by some of the greatest minds in modern science. Physicists like Sean Carroll have championed the many worlds view, arguing that it offers the cleanest and most consistent picture of quantum mechanics without resorting to vague notions like collapse or observer-induced change. To them, the cost of accepting infinite realities is worth the gain of preserving objective physics. Others, like Roger Penrose, have explored entirely different routes, proposing that quantum collapse might be tied to gravity itself, suggesting an underlying mechanism yet to be discovered. Then there are defenders of pilot wave theory, like Sheldon Goldstein, who argue that the comfort of determinism shouldn't be abandoned so easily, even if it requires rethinking the fundamentals. Each camp builds its case with rigor, intellect, and conviction. Each offers a glimpse into a different possible universe. And yet, no experiment has managed to settle the debate once and for all. That's the controversy. That's the paradox. We have a scientific framework that works flawlessly in practice, and yet we don't know what it actually means. We can manipulate atoms, build quantum computers, harness entanglement for communication. But when we ask, what is really going on beneath the surface? We hit a wall of interpretations. Even recent cutting-edge experiments like weak measurements, delayed choice tests, or quantum erasers have failed to tip the scale definitively in one direction. They reveal more of the weirdness, but not more clarity. In fact, some results have only deepened the mystery. Consider experiments showing that particles can retroactively change their behavior depending on future measurements, suggesting that time itself might be less fixed than we thought. Or tests hinting at non-locality, the idea that particles can influence each other instantly across space, defying classical constraints. Each discovery sharpens the enigma. Each test expands the map but never points clearly to a single answer. That's the intellectual beauty of quantum mechanics, and also its haunting curse. It forces us to confront the limits of certainty. It reminds us that science isn't just about equations. It's about the stories we tell to make sense of them. So here we are. On one hand, a view of reality shaped by probability and observation. On another, a deterministic universe guided by hidden variables. On another still, a multiverse branching endlessly in a quiet storm of possibilities. And on the far edge, a world shaped not by objects, but by the knowledge we bring to them. And you, standing in the middle of it all, are left with a question more profound than any experiment can answer. Which story do you believe? Do you accept the cold precision of the many worlds landscape? Do you cling to the simplicity of collapse? Do you trust in hidden order, or embrace the chaos of subjective knowledge? Or do you find, perhaps, that the real truth lies not in choosing one story, but in understanding that science, too, contains mysteries it cannot yet resolve? The greatest scientific debate of our time may not end with a single discovery. It may never end at all. And maybe, just maybe, that's what makes it so powerful. Up next, we'll explore the deepest implications this debate has for your identity, your choices, and the meaning of your existence. Because once you accept that multiple realities may be real, the next question isn't about physics. It's about philosophy. There's a strange kind of stillness that settles in once the science has said all it can. Numbers, formulas, probabilities, they give us tools. But they don't answer the questions that keep us awake at night. They don't explain what it means to exist in a world where infinite versions of you may be real. And once you begin to entertain that possibility, not as science fiction, but as a serious framework for understanding the universe, everything shifts. Suddenly, the concept of reality no longer feels solid. Feels layered, expanding, refracting. Your choices, once considered definitive, now echo endlessly across a branching landscape of possibility. And beneath all the scientific discourse, a deeper undercurrent begins to rise, a philosophical reckoning. Because if the universe truly operates this way, then it's not just particles that split. It's purpose, its identity, its meaning itself. So let's start at the first fault line this theory opens up: free will. For centuries, humans have clung to the belief that we are agents of our own fate, that our decisions carry weight because they define the direction our lives take, that in every moment we stand at a crossroads, and the path we choose matters. But if every choice you make results in a branching of realities where all possible outcomes are realized, then what does choice even mean? If there is a version of you that accepts the job and a version that declines it, a version that stays in a relationship and a version that walks away, if all these possibilities play out in full somewhere, then how can any one choice be significant? This is not a hypothetical exercise. This is the core philosophical tension of the many worlds idea. It doesn't negate free will, but it reframes it. It suggests that your decision doesn't prevent any other outcome. It only determines which thread of the tapestry your awareness follows. You still choose, but your choice becomes a navigation point, not a gatekeeper. You're not closing doors. You're walking through one of many that already exist. That's a powerful and in some ways unsettling shift in perspective. It removes the weight of finality from decisions, but also the comfort of exclusivity. There's no singular timeline where you defined your destiny. There are many, and they all coexist, equally valid, equally real. So what does that make you? If there are infinite versions of you, each one slightly different, shaped by different circumstances, decisions, and outcomes, then which one is the real you? Is it the one you see in the mirror each morning? Is it the one achieving your dreams in another branch of existence? Is it the one you fear becoming but haven't? This idea cuts deep into our most basic understanding of selfhood. We often define ourselves by our memories, our choices, our experiences. But in a universe where multiple yous have different memories, choices, and experiences, the boundaries begin to dissolve. You are not a singular identity. You are a node in an expansive network of possibilities. Think of yourself not as a fixed character, but as a focal point, a lens through which one version of reality is experienced. That lens could shift. That experience could alter. And yet, none of it erases the other versions. They continue as real as you are now. That realization can be disorienting, but it also brings an unexpected clarity. It suggests that identity is not a solid object. It's a fluid interaction, a resonance between what exists and what is observed. You are the result of observation entangled with probability. You are the story being told on this particular branch of the cosmic narrative, but not the only story that exists. Now pause for a moment and consider what that means for meaning itself. In a single-world universe, meaning is tied to uniqueness. A single path gives weight to every step because there's only one version of events. But in a multiverse, meaning cannot come from exclusivity. It must come from presence, from intentional awareness of the timeline you inhabit. You may not be able to erase the existence of other possibilities, but you can choose how deeply you engage with this one. That's where meaning hides, not in rarity, but in depth. Not in being the only path, but in walking the path with full attention. There's another angle to this that stretches beyond modern physics, an echo from ancient wisdom. Long before quantum mechanics challenged our assumptions, many philosophical systems spoke of multiple existences, layered realities, and selfhood as something fluid rather than fixed. In Eastern traditions, this appears in concepts like reincarnation, samsara, and the illusion of a singular ego. The idea that you are more than the current form you occupy has deep roots. In some interpretations of Vedantic philosophy, the self is not the individual body-mind complex, but a field of awareness that witnesses many lives, many realities. The physical world is not an absolute truth but a projection, a maya, shaped by perception. In this light, the many worlds interpretation feels less like a radical departure from tradition and more like a scientific echo of ancient metaphysics. Even in Western thought, philosophers like Leibniz proposed the idea of multiple possible worlds, all logically coherent, some of which are actualized. Identity in these frameworks was never as rigid as we assume it to be. The self was always a layered construct, influenced by time, choice, and possibility. What quantum theory does is drag these ancient questions into the laboratory. It doesn't answer them, but it makes them unavoidable. And that brings us to the next crack in the foundation, morality. If every choice you could have made is made in some reality, then what does it mean to do right or wrong? If there's a version of you who always does the right thing, and another who always does the opposite, are you morally responsible for only your own actions, or for the entire spectrum of what you could have done? This is not just an ethical puzzle, it's a deep existential question. In traditional morality, you're judged by what you choose. But in a branching universe, morality becomes contextual. Your responsibility may not lie in preventing other realities. It may lie in living this one consciously, ethically, and authentically. Not because other versions of you might fail, but because this one can succeed. It's the presence of intention in this timeline that shapes your ethical compass. You may not be able to control what happens in other realities, but you can shape the quality of experience in this one. That, perhaps, becomes the new moral anchor. Not denying multiplicity, but committing fully to presence. Now consider how this awareness shifts your relationship to regret. In traditional thinking, regret stems from the idea that you've lost something, a path not taken, a chance not seized. But if every path is taken somewhere, then regret becomes a misunderstanding. You didn't lose that path, you simply didn't walk it in this thread of reality. And once you realize that, you might feel a strange sense of relief, because the burden of what could have been no longer carries the same weight. Those versions exist. They're not erased. They're just not yours to experience. Not in this moment, not in this branch. That doesn't mean your choices don't matter. It means your attachment to outcomes can soften. It means you can approach life with more grace, more curiosity, more freedom, Knowing that the richness of possibility doesn't diminish the value of presence. It enhances it. In a universe where all outcomes are possible, the act of choosing becomes an act of meaning. Not because it excludes other paths, but because it represents full engagement with the one you're on. Meaning is not in what you eliminate, it's in what you commit to. This, perhaps, is the most profound implication of all, because it brings the focus back to consciousness, to awareness, to presence. The very thing that quantum theory seems to suggest plays a central role in shaping experience. Not as a mystical force, but as a participatory agent. You are not a passive spectator in this cosmic unfolding. You are an active participant, shaping the narrative by your very act of attention. And so, the question becomes not, what is real? But, how do I choose to experience reality? That's where philosophy meets physics, not in abstraction, but in embodiment. In how you choose to think, to feel, to act in a reality that may not be exclusive, but is still profoundly meaningful. You are not just one version of yourself in a universe of endless variation. You are the center of awareness in this specific expression of life. And that is not a limitation, it's a gift. Because in this timeline, in this thread of experience, you still hold the power to choose how deeply you live, how fully you love, how consciously you engage with the reality before you. That power, perhaps, is what truly defines you, not your uniqueness among infinite versions, but your capacity to be fully present in this one. And that presence is not just philosophical. It's transformational, because the moment you realize that meaning doesn't depend on exclusion, that it thrives in the richness of conscious engagement, your entire experience of life begins to shift. You stop chasing the perfect path. You stop mourning the ones you didn't take. And you start recognizing that every moment, every breath, every interaction is an opportunity to experience depth, not just direction. You are not defined by what might have been. You are defined by what you bring to what is. In the next part, we'll explore how this awareness can become more than a philosophy, how it can be integrated into daily living. Because if all possibilities are real somewhere, then the most powerful act is to live this reality with intentional focus. There's a moment after the theory, after the philosophy, when something far more personal begins to rise. It's the moment when you're no longer just thinking about quantum mechanics or superposition, or parallel realities in abstract terms. It's the moment you sit quietly and ask yourself, if this is true, what does it mean for the way I live? Not in a grand cosmic sense, but in the quiet, often overlooked choices of your day-to-day existence. The small decisions, the lingering thoughts, the way you interpret the moments that pass through your hands like sand. Because up until now, this has all sounded like physics, like probability waves and wave function collapses. But underneath all of it lies a silent, pressing question that no theory can answer for you. How would you live differently if you knew that every possibility in your life was being explored somewhere? That question is not a riddle. It's a mirror. It forces you to turn inward and see the weight you give to your choices, the fears you attach to your regrets, the pressure you place on getting it right, as though there were only one right path and a single chance to walk it. But that narrative begins to fracture in a universe like this. If the structure of existence itself allows for infinite versions of every decision, then it's not about picking the one path and fearing the loss of the rest. It's about choosing to show up fully to the one you're experiencing now. This shift doesn't reduce responsibility. It intensifies presence. Because now, your life isn't about eliminating alternate possibilities. It's about embodying this one so completely that it becomes meaningful not through exclusivity, but through immersion. There's a psychological liberation in that. The burden of perfection begins to lift. The pressure to always make the right decision softens. And in its place, a deeper, more grounded way of living starts to emerge. A way of living that recognizes the power of awareness, of attention, of presence, not as abstract concepts, but as tools for shaping experience. This isn't about ignoring other possibilities. It's about knowing they exist and choosing still to live with commitment in the reality you're inhabiting. And that choice, though subtle, changes everything. Let's begin by looking at something most people carry quietly: regret. In traditional thinking, regret often festers because of finality. You didn't take the opportunity. You said the wrong thing. You waited too long. And in a linear world, those moments are lost forever. But in a reality shaped by quantum possibilities, that weight starts to dissolve. That version of life still exists. That moment still plays out. You didn't erase it, you just aren't experiencing it in this thread of consciousness. And that's a quiet freedom most people never realize they have. You can let go of the belief that your life is a single line etched in stone. You can begin to release the grip of alternate paths that haunt your thoughts. They're not lost, they're just elsewhere. And that opens the door to a more radical idea: presence as power. Because if all paths exist, and you're walking one of them now, then your greatest act of agency is not controlling outcomes. It's showing up to them with full presence. Your focus becomes your creative force. Your attention becomes your compass. Your engagement becomes your anchor in this unfolding. This awareness doesn't make your current life meaningless. It makes it sacred. It shifts your energy from grasping at missed opportunities to cultivating depth in what's in front of you. It transforms your decisions from fearful calculations to intentional acts of self-expression. And slowly, you stop living like you're missing out on something better. You start living like you are exactly where your consciousness chose to be. Now consider how this shift can influence your decision-making. Most choices come with anxiety, not because the options are unclear, but because the consequences feel final. But what happens when you stop thinking in terms of finality and start thinking in terms of exploration? You stop trying to make the perfect decision. You start making the present one meaningful. You stop obsessing over whether you're picking the right life. You start trusting that the life you're in can become right through how you meet it. This doesn't mean you abandon discernment. It means you use it differently. You stop searching for the one ideal future and start asking a different question. How do I show up in this life with depth, integrity, and purpose? And once you ask that question, you begin living not from fear, but from clarity. You start cultivating a state of awareness that transcends outcomes and connects deeply with intention. You begin recognizing that it's not about optimizing every possibility. It's about embodying one possibility fully, so it becomes the kind of experience that leaves an imprint on the fabric of existence. There's a powerful practice that helps bring this awareness into the practical realm. It's called the Quantum Journal, a personal exercise designed to expand your relationship with alternate realities without losing touch with the present one. Here's how it works. Every day, you write a few pages from the perspective of another version of you. Not fantasy, not wishful thinking, but a focused, grounded exploration of another possible thread your life could have taken. You might write from the voice of the you who moved to another city, the you who pursued a different passion, the you who made a different decision during a turning point. As you write, you don't judge these versions. You don't compare them. You simply let them exist on the page, valid, vibrant, complete. And something fascinating happens. You begin to expand your identity beyond the limitations of linear time. You start seeing that the you in this life is just one note in a much larger symphony. You start living not in comparison, but in appreciation. Not in scarcity, but in richness. It's not about escaping your current life. It's about anchoring into it more deeply by recognizing that it is one of many, and therefore infinitely precious. There's another layer to this way of living, the way it reshapes your relationship with uncertainty. Most people fear the unknown because they treat it as a threat. But in a quantum universe, the unknown isn't a void, it's a field of possibility. The unknown is not where things go wrong, it's where things can be anything. And that awareness turns anxiety into curiosity. When you meet uncertainty not with dread, but with presence, you shift your entire energetic posture. You stop resisting change. You start participating in creation. You stop fearing possibility. You start shaping it through attention, decision, and presence. That's not a metaphor. That's a lived reality. It means every choice becomes an invitation. Every challenge becomes a point of engagement. Every moment becomes an opportunity to express consciousness, not just survive circumstance. And it all leads to one core realization. You are not here to live every possible life. You are here to live this one fully. That's the paradox at the heart of quantum living. Every path exists, and yet the one you walk becomes sacred through your willingness to inhabit it deeply. It becomes rich not by comparison, but by presence. This understanding can also shift your relationship with personal growth. In a single-path worldview, progress often feels like a race. You're trying to get ahead, catch up, or outpace regret. But in a quantum perspective, growth becomes something else entirely. It becomes resonance. You're not climbing a ladder. You're tuning an instrument. You're aligning your internal experience with the version of yourself you're choosing to embody more fully. And that's a gentler, wiser, more sustainable path. It's not about chasing success. It's about embodying congruence. It's not about arriving somewhere perfect. It's about refining how you experience what's already here. And that kind of growth is not about quantity, it's about quality. It's about deepening into the thread of life you're currently holding, with greater clarity, integrity, and love. That's the essence of quantum living. Not a life of infinite outcomes, but a life of infinite engagement. A life where you stop trying to fix the path and start learning how to walk it with awareness. A life where you stop measuring meaning by rarity and start cultivating it through depth. And slowly, you begin to understand that this one life, this one version of reality, is not a lesser version of others. It's the one your consciousness is witnessing now. And that makes it sacred, not because it's better than the rest, but because you are here, and that in itself is profound. There's one idea, quietly sitting beneath everything you've heard so far. It's not about the many worlds, not about timelines or choices, not even about infinite versions of you. It's about something far more personal, something that moves through every moment you experience but often goes unnoticed. It's the power of observation. At first glance, this may seem like a scientific principle, just another strange phenomenon from quantum theory. But if you stay with it a little longer, if you begin to let it breathe within your own awareness, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes a doorway, a lens, a force that reshapes your entire reality. You've heard the phrase before, the observer effect. In quantum mechanics, it refers to the way particles behave differently when they are being measured. Particle is not in a fixed state until it's observed. The act of watching it, of paying attention to it, forces it to settle into a particular outcome. It's not speculation. It's been shown over and over through rigorous experiments. The simple act of observation shapes what is real. Now step back from the science for a moment and think about what that really means. Not in a laboratory, but in your own life. Because if particles respond to observation, if the fundamental building blocks of your reality shift according to awareness, then what role does your own consciousness play in shaping the world you move through? This isn't abstract philosophy. It's a direct reflection of how your attention alters your experience. What you look at changes. What you focus on becomes more vivid. What you choose to see begins to define the framework of your personal reality. You've been taught to think of observation as passive, as though looking at something is simply receiving what's already there. But quantum theory whispers a different truth. To observe is to influence. To pay attention is to initiate transformation. So what does that mean for the life you're living? It means you're not just a passenger in your own story. You're the one who brings it into focus. You're the one who decides what becomes solid. You're the one whose awareness turns potential into form. Every day, every hour, you are collapsing waves of possibility into concrete experience. Not through action alone, but through attention. Through the things you choose to notice. The thoughts you give weight to, the feelings you allow to breathe, the meaning you assign to what unfolds. Your life, in this light, becomes a sequence of observations. Not just events, but chosen focal points. And within that realization lies a power far greater than control. It is the power to shape perception with precision. It's not about changing the world outside of you. It's about changing what you see within it, and letting that vision alter the landscape around you. Consider how this shifts your understanding of decisions. You've been told that the power of a decision lies in its outcome. But there's something deeper. The power of a decision lies in what you choose to observe about it. The interpretation you bring, the angle you hold, the meaning you assign, the lens you use. Two people can live the same moment and walk away with entirely different realities. Not because the event was different, but because the observation was. That is not metaphorical. That's the quiet machinery behind perception. You create experience not only through choice, but through what you choose to focus on after the choice has been made. And through that lens, you begin to understand, reality is not simply what happens, it's what you observe happening. Now ask yourself, what are you observing most often? Is your focus constantly drawn to lack, to loss, to regret, to chaos? Or is it being trained, slowly and intentionally, to notice depth, to cultivate clarity, to witness the unfolding of a meaningful life? This is not about toxic positivity. It's not about pretending things are better than they are. It's about learning to master your lens, to recognize that your attention has gravitational pull, that what you observe gains substance, weight, and momentum. And once you see this, you begin to realize something profound. The most powerful tool you have is not action, it's attention. Because attention precedes behavior. It shapes desire. It influences direction. It defines what matters. And over time, the things you continually observe begin to crystallize into the story you call your life. You are the observer. But more than that, you are the creator through observation. You don't need to change every external factor. You need to sharpen your focus. You need to become conscious of the frames you use to define your experience. You need to realize that your reality is not waiting to be found. It's being shaped, second by second, by your gaze. Now think back to everything you've explored in this journey, from quantum superposition to multiple realities to the many worlds interpretation. It's all been building to this core idea. Your awareness is the axis around which all possibility spins. Not just in theory, but in practice. And that leads to one final thought, one last thread to pull on before you step back into your daily life. If the act of observing collapses a wave of probability into a specific outcome, then your presence is not passive, it's participatory. You're not simply watching reality unfold. You're shaping it through engagement, through focus, through meaning. So here's a quiet experiment you can try, not in theory, but in your actual life. Start paying attention not just to what happens, but to how you observe it. Watch the stories your mind tells in response. Notice the conclusions you draw, the beliefs you reinforce, the emotions you amplify. Then pause. Ask yourself, not what happened, but what did I choose to observe and what happened? That one shift in questioning begins to rewire your reality. Because now you're not just reacting, you're shaping. You're not just interpreting, you're influencing. You're not just experiencing life. You're creating the conditions for that experience through focused attention. And as that awareness deepens, you begin to walk through life differently. Not detached, not anxious, but empowered, grounded, intentional. You start seeing the invisible threads you've always held in your hands. The threads of observation, attention, and meaning. And slowly, you begin to realize that the deepest truth of quantum theory isn't just about particles or possibilities. It's about the observer. It's about you. You are not a passive character in this universe. You are the one whose observation shapes the very fabric of what becomes real. You are not just living in a world of many possibilities. You are choosing, in each breath, which one becomes your lived experience. Through the stories you accept, the meanings you construct, the focus you sustain. And perhaps, in the end, the most powerful realization is not that multiple realities exist, but that you bring this one into form by the quality of your attention. So the question becomes not just, what is real? But rather, what are you choosing to make real right now? That is the question that will follow you far beyond this video. It's the question that lives quietly behind your thoughts, your choices, your relationships, your ambitions. And it's the question that reminds you, every moment is a wave waiting to collapse into something meaningful. Not through chance, through presence, through observation, through you. You've just stepped through one of the most mind-bending explorations you may ever encounter. But the real journey doesn't end here. It actually begins now, in the quiet moments after this video, when you're left with the lingering questions, the subtle shifts in perspective, and the weight of something far deeper than information. Because now, it's no longer just about theories or possibilities. It's about what you choose to do with this awareness. It's about the perspective you carry forward from this point onward. And that perspective, whether you realize it or not, is already influencing your trajectory. So here's a thought worth sitting with. In this exact moment, your awareness has already shifted your world. It may not be loud. It may not feel dramatic. But something has been set in motion, not outside you, but within you. A subtle recalibration of how you perceive reality, yourself, and the infinite potential of every moment ahead. And that brings us to a very simple invitation, one that may hold more power than it appears on the surface. Start observing your life more consciously. Not just the big moments, not just the turning points, but the subtle ones. The way you respond to ordinary decisions. The thoughts you accept without question. The emotional tones you repeat each day without noticing. These are your real superpositions, your real alternate realities, playing out moment by moment through the prism of your attention. You don't need to make drastic changes. You don't need to become a different person overnight. But what you can do, what you're always able to do, is shift how you observe what's already unfolding. Because now you know something most never stop to consider. Each moment contains not one path, but many. And the one that becomes real is often the one you choose to engage with most deeply. So ask yourself, what kind of reality are you feeding with your observation? Are you consistently noticing fear, limitation, dissatisfaction, regret? Or are you slowly beginning to train your attention toward curiosity, growth, clarity, and meaning? This is not wishful thinking. This is quantum logic meeting conscious living. This is the science of possibility meeting the art of attention. And if you're still here, listening, reflecting, absorbing, then you're already part of a small percentage of people willing to think beyond the surface, willing to stretch the limits of what is assumed, willing to explore not only the universe out there, but the one within. Now it's time to anchor this awareness in your daily life. Here's a thought exercise you can carry forward. For the next 7 days, take just 5 minutes at the end of your day to ask one question. What did I observe today that shaped my reality? Write it down, not as a journal of events, but as a journal of observation. What did you focus on? What meaning did you assign? What emotional tone colored your perception? What assumptions silently filtered your view? You may be shocked to see how much of your experience was not shaped by what happened, but by how you looked at it. And once you begin to see this pattern, you unlock a door most never find, the door to conscious creation. Not creation through willpower alone, but creation through refined attention, through silent awareness, through focused presence. You don't need quantum computers to harness this. You don't need laboratories or degrees. You already hold the most powerful instrument in your hands, your awareness, your focus, your perception. And from this day forward, you'll never quite see it the same again. Because you now carry the understanding that reality is not a fixed landscape. It's a fluid field of probability, crystallized through observation. You now know that you are not at the mercy of fate, but rather participating in the unfolding of your own reality through every thought, every emotion, every focus point. So here's the final question I want to leave you with, not just for reflection, but as a compass you can return to again and again. If every reality exists somewhere, Which one are you choosing to live right now through your attention? And if you could shift that focus even slightly, what version of your life would begin to materialize in front of you? That's not science fiction. That's a lived possibility. You don't need to see the other worlds to be affected by them. You only need to become conscious of this one. Because this one, this moment, this reality is where your observation has landed. It's where your energy is present. It's where your life is being shaped. And that's the real power of all of this, not in escaping to some alternate timeline, but in learning to bring your full consciousness into the one you're living now. So if this video stirred something in you, if it opened a new door in your mind, if it made you question what you've always accepted as reality, then this is your invitation to keep going. There are infinite layers to explore. Quantum mechanics, consciousness, perception, identity, metaphysics, they're not just academic topics. They are keys. They are tools. They are maps to a deeper understanding of your existence. And this channel exists for exactly that purpose, to keep unfolding those layers with you, one idea at a time. So here's how you can continue this journey. Drop a comment below and share. Which alternate reality are you most curious about? Is it the one where you took a different path in life? The one where you overcame your fear? The one where you followed your calling? Or maybe something even more subtle, like the version of you that simply chose a different focus each day? There's no right answer, only honest reflection. And through that reflection, you contribute to a conversation that matters far more than any algorithm. If you found this video thought-provoking, consider watching some of our other explorations on topics like the nature of consciousness, the architecture of identity, or the invisible mechanics behind your decisions. You'll find them connected by one common thread: the idea that reality is more fluid, more expansive, and more participatory than you've ever been told. And if you want to go even deeper, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, because what's coming next will build directly on this foundation, challenging the way you think, feel, observe, and ultimately live. You've now entered a space where ideas become instruments, where awareness becomes agency, and where thought becomes a creative force. This is not just about knowledge. It's about resonance. It's about finding the frequency that shifts your way of being. And if this video resonated with you, then that frequency is already tuning your reality. So before you go, pause. Take one deep breath and feel it. Feel the quiet weight of this moment, the simplicity, the presence, the awareness of yourself observing everything you've just heard. That's the starting point of everything. Not the next video, not the next thought, but this awareness right here. And in that space, you begin to see clearly. You are not just part of the universe. You are the observer through which the universe becomes real. Thank you for watching. Your next reality begins now.